Hello, everyone. Wow, great crowd here to learn some science.
Yes.
Excellent.
Science for the win.
Yeah. All right. We're really excited to give this talk. Obviously, a big part of the cruise this year is celebrating the 60th anniversary of the original series. Yay.
Inspirations for so many of us.
Exactly. So as sort of your resident scientists on the cruise ship, we thought that it would be fun to go back to 1966 and reflect on what we knew in science at that time. But before we dive into things, we should probably introduce ourselves a little bit.
Sure.
So my name is Erin, or Dr. Erin as I'm called, but I'm not going to make you call me that. It's okay. But my background, my PhD is in general relativity and gravitational waves, so physics, astronomy type stuff. I worked as a researcher, and then as a public educator, and then as an aerospace engineer, and then found myself in the entertainment industry doing science advising. And since 2019, which is wild, I have been the resident science advisor for the franchise. So working on all the shows. Thank you. And Professor Noor and I were lucky enough, we can tell that story, but we were lucky enough to work on season 3 and 4 of Discovery together, and then a few episodes here and there. So tell them about yourself.
Sure. My name is Mohamad Noor. I'm a Thank you. Thank you. I'm a professor at Duke University. I've been there for a little over 20 years, and as Dr. Erin mentioned, actually it's interesting, we started working on Discovery in 2019, but we'd already been giving talks at conventions together about science in Star Trek before either of us worked in the franchise. So
completely independently.
Exactly. So it was really nice getting to come together and actually work on the project. So this was fantastic. But anyway, pleasure to be with all of you here. It's been wonderful chatting with you throughout the cruise so far. So we're excited to dive into this talk.
All right, let's do it. So let me see, I think I'm up first. We're going to be talking about physics and technology in the original series. So going through sort of planetary, stellar classifications, some space exploration, and then some medical technology, which will blend nicely into Professor Noor's section. So first I want to talk about stellar classifications. So this is a thing that was developed in the early 1900s. Some of you may have heard the name Annie Jump Cannon or some of the Harvard computers, back when the term computer was literally a person who computes things. And it was a group of women primarily at Harvard who went through all of just by eye, by line, stellar spectra. So the lines that we were getting off, basically you put starlight through a prism and you see these lines spike in it and you measure all of those and then you categorize them. And that's a big part of like astronomy when we talk about astronomy versus astrophysics. Astronomy is sort of the categorization, the librarianship, the archivism of what's in space. So trying to find classifications and ways that we can group things together. So that was developed in the early 1900s. Some of you who took Astronomy 101 because you needed to take a science credit and then got really angry that you had to do math. It's fine. I taught a lot of you in that circumstance. May remember the naming system, which is OBAFGKM. I like to say, "Oh, be a fine Gorn, kiss me," but then now it's like Ortega's fan fiction, so, which I'm not upset about either, but that's fine. And so a G-type star is sort of what we talk about, and where those acronyms came from, again, it's sort of trickled down from that Harvard classification system where they were assigning alphabetical letters to specific lines, and then those lines translated to certain temperatures. So that's why it's out of order, out of alphabetical order. But if you start at O, those are going to be really bright, really hot, white, blue stars. They don't live very long, right? Live fast, die young type thing. And then all the way at the M-class stars, those are going to be ones that are red, cool, they live for a long time, but they're very, they don't give off a ton of energy. And then all of that, that's how we sort of classify stars. So our sun is a G-type star. But I need to put a pause in this because I said an M-class or an M-type star sounds very Star Trek-y. and that's because they have Class M planets, right? So we have Class M stars, but in astronomy and astrophysics, we don't classify those types of planets yet. Now, we have been finding lots of exoplanets, but we call them things like Earth-like planets or Hycean-type planets, ones that are water worlds, any of those, but we we haven't developed a similar sort of classification system. So it's important to note that we have that letter schema for stars, but not necessarily for planets. Again, a lot of astronomers became astronomers because of Star Trek. So now that we've actually started finding a lot of exoplanets, we may or may not adopt that system, we're hoping. We all know what it means, but going to the original series, so the context of what we're talking about, right? This naming convention was started in the early 1900s, so by the time the original series came about, we were very used to saying a G-type star, a K-type star, all of those, and in Spock's brain, everyone's favorite episode, what, you mean Spock's brain, Spock's brain, Spock's brain, Spock's brain?
What is brain?
They mention the planet Sigma Draconis, the star system Sigma Draconis, which is a spectral type Gamma 9. And I will take that is a G9 type star. And we do break those into subsections of G0 through G9. So a G9 type star is a thing. So that's a thing that Star Trek got right. Again, the planetary side of things, we don't really assign M-class star, J-class star, or J-class planet, I'm sorry, M-class planet, J-class planet, any of those. That's not an astrophysics thing. Hopefully it might be in the future. I wouldn't put it past us, but when Star Trek came out, they were really just basing that on the concept of stellar classification as well. So it wouldn't be a lecture with me without a science lecture. I'm going to teach you some science. And the thing that we need to learn here is about the life cycle of the stars. So we're going to kind of go around in the clock. This one starts at sort of 9 o'clock here on this diagram. You think about how stars evolve, how they come into being, how they end their life, and what that cycle looks like. We start with a nebula. So a nebula is a cloud of dust and gas. Nebula really just means cloud, and it can be anything like that in space. That's why we classify it as like star-forming nebula. So this is a nebula that is in the process of becoming a star. So a star-forming nebula is in the process of coalescing. We sort of get the dust starts to stick to itself. It starts to clump together. As it clumps together, it's going to have higher mass, which means it has higher gravity than the stuff around it. So other things are going to be attracted to those clumps. Those clumps are going to continue to attract to each other. And then we're going to end up with a globule. Best science word. And that globule is really just going to be a loose mess of dust and gas that has kind of found itself like a loose snowball compact together. But as it starts to keep getting denser and denser, we have friction, right? So if you rub your hands, you're going to feel that warmth coming back. That friction is going to start heating up that globule, that dense cloud, and that's what we call a protostar. So a protostar is glowing, but it doesn't have any fusion happening yet. We just have a hot, dense glob of dust and gas that is heated and glowing just simply from friction, from thermal heat. Then it gets so hot and so dense that right in the middle, all of these little hydrogen atoms, mostly hydrogen in our universe, are going to be pressed together and they fuse. And when they fuse into helium, they give off light. And that's when we say like a star is born, right? So that's the beginning of a star. Now, two things can happen. That's where you get sort of the classifications. We call that a main sequence star. It's burning hydrogen into helium. That's what it's going to do for 90+% of its life. As it reaches the end of its life, depending on how massive it is, two things will happen. So we start to run out of hydrogen, and it starts to expand into a red giant. We keep burning helium into carbon, we keep burning through all of these chains until you run out of just pressure. So the gravitational pressure and the pressure that's pushing out from all the radiation will not be able to compete with each other anymore, and the star's gonna die. But how it dies depends on how massive it is. So our sun is an average type star, again, a G-type star, so it's right in the middle. It will not go supernova. That's what most people think about when we think about stars dying. It isn't massive enough for the whole thing to collapse in on itself. Basically, a supernova is like if you run out of that radiation pressure pushing out from all the fusion that's happening and you run out of it, it's so massive that the outer layers fall in on each other until they can't break the laws of physics, and then the outer layers that are still falling on bounce off, and you get this big supernova. Our star will not do that. We have this dense core that's running out of fuel to fuse together. The outer layers will just kind of be like, I'm done. Like, okay, that's cool. And what's left behind is this core, this glowing core called a white dwarf. So that's where a white dwarf comes from. If you have a massive, supermassive star, you get that supernova, you get that explosion, and what's left behind then branches into either a neutron star or a black hole. Don't need to remember that, don't need to know the details, just knowing that sort of the three possible end of states of stars are a white dwarf, a black hole, or a neutron star, and that depends on how massive the main star was during its life. Then that nebula that's left behind, whether through an explosion, a supernova, or whether it's just a planetary nebula from sloughing off the outer layers of the star, you still have now dust and gas that's left behind, and that will start forming another star. So this is a life cycle of stars that happens in our universe constantly. Okay, so when we think about the stars that we see in the sky, this is actually an image of the Alpha Centauri system, so the closest system to us. It is a trinary star system. Two stars are on the main sequence, meaning they're going through that 95% of their life, hydrogen into helium, burning things as normal. But that little bright white one on the side, that is actually a white dwarf. So it has already finished its life, and that is a white dwarf. Now, if I go back to this slide, you can see there's a little, and I've shown this slide a lot in a lot of talks, so you may have seen it, but you might not have ever noticed a thing called a black dwarf. If you follow the white dwarf around, it turns into a black dwarf. That is a theoretical, bold, italicized, underlined, stellar object that is what a white dwarf will eventually turn into. And the concept is that you have all this residual heat, this massive glowing core of a star. It's like you just took it out of the oven and it starts cooling off. But it's so hot and so dense, like it's gonna take time to cool off. And the reason that they're theoretical is because our universe has not been around long enough for any white dwarf to cool off. So they do the math, they calculate how much time it will take for a white dwarf, this leftover core, to just cool off and turn into a black dwarf. And it supersedes how long the universe has been around. Or you have like a small white dwarf, so maybe that could cool off. But the mass that would be required for a small white dwarf to have enough time to cool off, it would never make a star in the first place. So that's why it's like theoretical on either side of things. It's either not enough time to cool off or it's not going to be big enough to exist in the first place. And this was first proposed in a paper in 1962. So this idea of a black dwarf was first conceptualized. They're thinking about the life cycle of stars in 1962, and they actually mentioned black dwarfs a couple times in the original series, specifically Psi 2000 from the Naked Time. They say there's a black dwarf star. So again, as we've established, they're theoretical, but Star Trek was like, this is a thing people are talking about. But we don't want to confuse that with black holes. So in Tomorrow's Yesterday, aired in 1967, Kirk mentions that they are approaching a black star of high gravitational attraction. That sure sounds a lot like a black hole. So why didn't he call that a black hole, right? We have a dense star of high gravitational attraction, right? The reason black holes are the way they are is because they're so high in gravity that light can't escape. What I mean by that is, in order to get out of a gravity well, like we want to launch rockets off of the Earth, you need to have enough velocity to get out of our gravity well, and eventually you're going to have like a black hole where that gravity well is so steep that you need to go faster than the speed of light to climb out of it. But nothing can go faster than the speed of light, so it's just trapped there, which is a black hole. The reason Kirk calls it a black star of high gravitational attraction is because around this same time, we were just discovering black holes. So the first one that was ever discovered was in 1964, but they didn't even call it a black hole at the time. The reason they saw that is they saw an object where there was a lot of stuff falling into something and it was glowing in the X-rays. So as sort of a dead star system is falling into a black hole, it's going to have all of this residual heat from all of the gas that's falling into that, and it's going to glow in X-rays. So they first saw this but they didn't call it black holes. Or did they? This is actually a huge point of contention. When was the first phrase black hole ever used? And it is literally like when the original series was airing. So this is the first time in a general public paper black hole was ever written down. And it was a report on the American Association for the Advancement of Science meeting in 1964 when they were presenting that research on the discovery of this high gravitational well that had stuff falling into it. And the story is, someone said, it's like a black hole. But like literally had never been said before. So the person reporting on the meeting wrote that down, put that in their article, but it never made it into a scientific publication until 1967, which is when that Tomorrow's Yesterday episode came out. So it's a little chicken and the egg thing, but certainly you could see like the lexicon of the time, what is on writers' minds, what's on scientists' minds. Black holes are becoming a big thing around the original series. Okay, pulsars. We see them all the time, right? Star Trek, all the time, pulsars. Good old Janeway, she's always looking at pulsars. But if you watch the original series, they don't ever mention pulsars, ever. They don't say the word pulsar in the original series. And that's because they weren't discovered until 1967. This is the first glimpse into a possible pulsar. There was on August 9th, 1967. They're looking at an object that they called CP 1919, and they saw a blip and then interference written on the side. This is the actual discovery. And then they were like, well, maybe we should keep looking at this thing. And then the original series is airing. Journey to Babel comes out. Great. November 17th, 1967. Friday's Child's comes out a couple weeks later on December 1st, 1967. In between that, the first observation of pulses from CP 1919, 28th of November, 1967. This was the first detection of pulsars ever. And it's just named because we see these regular pulses. Again, now they sort of had that blip from their telescope. They pointed at it and saw these regular beats in the spectra that they were like, it's pulsing. And now we found out that this is actually a type of neutron star. So it's a dead neutron star, massive star, has been supernovaed, wasn't mass enough to become a black hole, but we have this core left over. And what's happening is it beams out radio waves like a lighthouse, and it flashes us like a lighthouse. And so that's what we're able to see. That's what pulsars are. They were discovered by Jocelyn Bell Burnell, who was a graduate student. Yeah. Her supervisor got the Nobel Prize. She did not. Yes. Correct reaction. Thank you. No one is upset about that. But she dedicated her life to advancing women and underrepresented groups in science. She was actually awarded a big prize in the I think 2015, like $15 million for her contribution. They were like, please take this money. Sorry, love science. And then she turned around and turned that into a fund to get more underrepresented people into science. So yeah, Jocelyn Bell Burnell, great person. But in 1967, going home and watching Star Trek. We can assume. All right, sort of the last big thing I want, a couple last things. I know I'm almost there, I'm going. In the exploration of space aspect, right? We all know the speech, the Kirk speech, why we discover. I'm not gonna try to imitate it. You all know what I'm talking about. In Return to Tomorrow, that episode aired in February of 1968. But remember what he says in that speech, what if Apollo hadn't landed on the moon? Apollo hadn't even been to the moon when he said those words. That episode came out on 9th February 1968. Apollo 8, which was the one that orbited the moon for the first time, the first one to get to the moon, was later that year in December 1968. And then in, of course, July 1969 was when we landed on the moon. Now, it's not like Kirk was like, we landed on the moon, and then everyone went, land on the moon! Go, go, go! Like, the Apollo mission was around. They knew what the goal was. It was looking good. It's all in the spirit of the time. But it does still blow my mind just to think that like when he is saying those words, we had not been to the moon yet, which is pretty cool. Yeah. Okay, the last one I want to talk about is the medical technology of the time. So the medical technology, obviously we see the tricorders and we can kind of conceptualize in our brains like science and medical technology has come a long way since 1966, I think is probably a safe assumption. Even just the fact that I'm essentially wearing like a tricorder like on my wrist, right? That's measuring all these things for me. That's pretty common technology, and those were fairly new at the time. But when we're looking at sort of scanners, scanning technologies, X-rays had been around, bombarding people with X-rays, and ultrasound technology had been around, bombarding people with sound waves, and then you can kind of see the results. But a lot of scanners that we use all the time these days, like CT scanners, hadn't been invented yet, like at all. They were invented in 1971-ish was the first CT scan that was made. And then you could see it was first called the EMI scanner Mark I. And this is my favorite fact of what I learned putting this talk together. So strap in. Okay. It's not really Star Trek related, but it is 1960s related. EMI scanner, EMI. Electrical Music Industries. Do we remember what EMI produced? Beatles albums, yes. And it is generally assumed that the Beatles' popularity is what funded the CT scanner. So talk about diversification in your portfolio. Now, they obviously split up and everything from then, but in terms of investment into technologies, it was EMI. Yes, the same EMI invented a CT scanner called a CAT scan at the time, but then the early 1970s, they became a thing and they were used pretty often. Same with MRIs. The technology, the concept was there, but they hadn't turned it into a tool that could be used on a regular basis and used in many hospitals along that time. But when we're watching Star Trek, the original series, and they're putting people on beds and scanning them and taking in all of this data, we're like maybe halfway to the type of technology we have now, let alone what they were actually using. So pretty amazing technology for that time. So with the medical stuff, I'm going to hand it over to Professor Noor to talk about
Let's give
biology.
it up for Dr. Macdonald.
Thank you.
Thank you. I should preface, by the way, I am not a medical doctor, just to make that very clear. I'm an evolutionary biologist. But anyway, I'm happy to talk about some biology in the original series. I'm going to talk about the biology of the 1960s, comparable to what Dr. Erin was talking about for the physics. I'm going to go into three specific things, one on genetics, one on biochemistry. One on genetics, one on biochemistry, and one on evolution. But generally speaking, the original series, like all Star Trek, tends to reflect the science of its time. This graph's a little bit hard to see. The y-axis shows the fraction of episodes that use words like DNA, genetic, and genome. And the x-axis has original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. Not surprisingly, when you look back at the original series there, no episodes use the word genome. I mean, that's not a surprise at all. But only, I think, there was one, maybe, I'll show you numbers in just a second. I think it was something like one reference to DNA and a very small number to genetic. We had not yet sequenced DNA at the point in time the original series had come out. This is a long time ago. We are in a very, very different era now. So just for kicks and giggles, it's not the way you usually say it. I actually went through and counted using Control F the number of references to various terms. So if you look, the total number of references across the original series is 1 mention of DNA, 2 of genes, 4 of something that is like genetics, genetic, 4 of mutation or something derivative from that, and 1 nucleotide. Most of those are actually all in the same episode. Anybody have a guess what episode it might be? What is it? The amoeba one, space seed, I'm hearing a couple of others. It's interesting. I mean, all of those come up somewhat, but actually the black and white cookie episode has the most. That has the most references of all of them. But you all nailed many of the others too, the space amoeba, deadly years, the token Nazi episode, all those things come up a little bit in those as well. Anyway, if you want to compare those numbers there for DNA, genetics, and things like that, I decided, well, let me do a little control. Let me look for some other terms. So evolution, or something like evolution, came up 33 times. Biology, 11. I picked a few for Dr. Erin here. Acceleration, or accelerate, 29. Gravity, 26. Anything chemical or chemistry, 28. So really, genetics was not really a part of it. And even in places where you would think genetics would be the right thing to do, they were not doing it. Again, I'm not criticizing them because, again, the science was not there yet. They were using what was available to them at the time. And to me, one of the most interesting examples of this was in the episode Conscience of the King. You may remember they were trying to figure out if Anton Caridian, this actor, was Kodos the Executioner. And I have a quote here. This is what Kirk said. Read this into that communicator on the wall. It will be recorded and compared to a piece of Kodos's voice film. I like voice film. We have in our files, the test is virtually infallible. We would not do that now. But I mean, it made sense. I mean, using the technology of the time, this would be the approach that would have been taken. So again, this just kind of sets the era. But with this as an intro, let's talk about genetics. And when we think about genetics, what is something that jumps to your mind in terms of people and genetics and original series? Khan, yes, real Khan, not this guy. Real Khan. So people always refer to Khan as something from genetic engineering, but actually if you go back to the episode Spacey, they did not say genetic engineering because the idea of, or the concept of genetic engineering hadn't really come about in the way we think of it today. Instead, what they said is he resulted from, quote, an attempt to improve the race through selective breeding. Let's think about what that means. Now, that is kind of a genetic engineering, but it's not what we think of today when we say genetic engineering. When we talk about selective breeding, we talk about something that's been done for literally millennia. So one example is, of course, if you look at the wolf-like ancestor of dogs and see the selective breeding that was done to the incredible diversity of dogs we have today, this was a product of selective breeding. You essentially chose traits in the offspring of that wild wolf and said, I want floppy ears, I want, spots, I want whatever. You bred ones that were similar, and you got an outcome from it. We did the same thing, of course, in the context of crops. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this. This is a random mustard, Brassica oleracea. But in fact, I heard somebody say, this is actually the wild mustard ancestor of kale and kohlrabi and broccoli and cauliflower and cabbages, collards, Brussels sprouts, and so many of the vegetables you eat today came from our selective breeding of this one wild mustard. This is something that happens a lot. And selective breeding is very, very successful in general. You just need three things for it to work. And if you have these three things happen, selective breeding or natural selection is mathematically inevitable, right? The first one is you have to have some sort of variation in the trait. There has to be some diversity, like some have spots, some don't. Some have floppy ears, some don't. You need also the variations to have to be inherited in the offspring, that the offspring are more likely to look like the parents than to look like a random individual. It doesn't have to be perfectly inherited, but it has to be somewhat inherited. And the last is that certain variants have higher survival or reproduction. When we are doing selective breeding, we are giving them the higher survival or reproduction. We are purposely breeding them. When natural selection does it, it's just the environment that is doing it. It's in effect exactly the same thing. And when you have these three conditions, natural selection is mathematically inevitable. So this could, in principle, have worked for Khan, but it opens up a really interesting question. When did this process start? Khan in the original series supposedly lived in the 1990s. Did George Washington start this? Do we go further back? It begs the question of how many generations did they have to get to Khan? So yeah, that one doesn't work so well. I mean, the principle is okay, but it doesn't work so well. So it got retconned, pun intended. It got retconned, sorry, bad dad pun, sorry. It got retconned in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, where they said he's, quote, a product of late 20th century genetic engineering. Now, genetic engineering in this sort of context is likely referring to actual direct manipulations of the genome as opposed to just sort of selective breeding. This is the way we talk about genetic engineering today. And many of you have probably heard about a system called CRISPR-Cas9 that has been developed. And this is actually very successful, where you can, splice in a gene, you can delete a gene, you can add something, you can change something that's in there. This actually is something that is done pretty regularly, not with, of course, with humans, but it is done in general in the laboratory with, fruit flies, yeast, etc. In principle, it could be done with anything. And what you would do is you would apply it to either germ cells or a single-celled embryo. And if you do that, the effect would be immediate. Like if you were to splice in something that made, humans glow or whatever. I mean, we do this with fish. If you splice something to make them glow, the effect would happen in the offspring as they grew up. Now, this is technically feasible today, the idea of just doing some sort of genetic engineering, but we're missing a lot of the knowledge even today, even now in 2026. Like if somebody was to say, what genes would we splice and what letters, what DNA letters, remember DNA is usually made of 4 building blocks that are usually abbreviated A, C, G, and T. What letters would you change to make somebody extra smart and extra strong? We have no idea. We really don't. So we really don't have the knowledge even today to do that. And that's even setting aside the obvious ethical issues with human genetic manipulation into this sort of context. So technically feasible today. It was not technically feasible in, say, like the 1970s. I guess it would have to have gotten to Con in the 1990s. But again, it's a little bit closer. So this got retconned even a little bit further. Now I'm going outside of original series, just because I want to continue the Con aspect. Retconned further in Strange New Worlds, where now we have a young Con in 2022. Okay, now we're getting into the realm where you're getting closer, that maybe he was born in 2011. I mean, I don't know how old this kid is, but I'm just making it up. Maybe he was born in 2011, so conceived in 2010. You know, in the early 2000s, we absolutely had genetic engineering technology. But again, we still have insufficient knowledge of what changes to do. So every iteration is getting closer. Maybe like the 2030s Star Trek will actually completely nail it. But generally speaking, it's a good idea. And every iteration has a true scientific basis, and it gets closer with every iteration. Again, it reflects the science of the time all the time. So that's all I'm gonna say about genetics. Let's move on to a different field. How are we on time? Oh, we're great on time. So next thing I'm going to talk about a little bit about is biochemistry, and specifically this concept of non-carbon-based life. All right? Many of you have heard this, and many people are very interested in this. A lot of people in the scientific community are also very interested in this. You know, there's a lot of astrobiologists who've written about it. Now, when we say carbon-based life, when we talk about organic chemistry, the word organic doesn't mean relating to life. The word organic in this context means carbon-based. The chemicals that we think of in the context of life, like carbohydrates, that's a carbohydrate right there, have this carbon backbone. You see a C binding to a C, to a C, to a C, to a C. Proteins also have a carbon backbone. Lipids have a carbon backbone. DNA has a carbon backbone. Now, why carbon? Why is carbon so good? Well, if we go to the periodic table of elements, what we see there is carbon is number 6 there. I'm going to circle it. So the top one there that's circled, carbon is number 6. What carbon can do is carbon can bind to up to 4 other atoms. Right? Carbon can bind to up to 4 other atoms. Anything outside that column cannot do that. They're limited to binding to 2, 3, 1, something like that. But carbon can do 4. The advantage of 4, which since that's a big number, is you can make very complex structures. So you can make really complex things, maybe leading to something that would lead to us. We're pretty complex ourselves. Now, if you look at that, right below carbon is silicon. Okay, so it kind of sounds like it could make sense, and they got into this in the original series. The Horta was the one that they talked about the most explicitly. Excalbion, maybe. I mean, it kind of looks like a rock. I don't really know what it's made of. Maybe it's silicon-based. But this isn't the part I was going to highlight. This is very basic. I mean, a high schooler back in the 1960s could have come up with this part. What I was very impressed with was there was a specific quote that was said. I'm going to play a small clip here from Dr. McCoy. He says something very explicit.
Silicon-based life is physiologically impossible, especially in an oxygen atmosphere.
Especially in an oxygen atmosphere. That I thought was very, very impressive. Now, I'm going to read you a quote from a paper from 2020. Now, this was known earlier, but I was impressed that they actually had this available to the writers at the time in the 1960s. I'm going to read you this quote. It says, "The strength of a carbon-carbon bond is a little bit greater than that of a carbon-oxygen bond." Okay? Carbon-carbon is greater than carbon-oxygen. While the analogous silicon-oxygen bond is much stronger than a silicon-silicon bond. What does this mean? Given this, you can make a long chain of carbons in an oxygen atmosphere, but you cannot easily make a long chain of silicons because silicon would rather bind to oxygen. Right? So imagine if you have like even an oxygen atmosphere, or especially if you have water around there, this would be very problematic. But they nailed this. This was spot on correct. I was very impressed, not just the understanding of the periodic table, but the understanding of this particular issue. Now, there are workarounds. You may have seen some news stories that came out sometimes that maybe you can alternate silicon-carbon, maybe you can alternate silicon and other things. So it doesn't mean it's impossible. So McCoy did overstate that a little bit, but I mean, he's a medical doctor, not a biochemist, so fair. Nothing against the medical doctors, but anyways, point being that they still nailed a really important aspect about this difficult thing. And this is one of the reasons that truly, in general, carbon probably is the most likely basis for life, even more than silicon. Doesn't mean silicon's impossible, but it's more likely than most. So let's leave biochemistry alone and let's go to my favorite topic, evolution. Woo! So I have a whole talk on this subject that's tomorrow. I'm just going to have a little teaser from it here today because I want to highlight one example from the original series that I thought was really good. Generally speaking, in all of Star Trek, especially in the original series, but in general, we see lots and lots of humanoids. lots and lots of humanoids that can even interbreed. They're like, okay, why are there humanoids like on half the galaxy here, right? They're everywhere. Now, there's a lot of explanations for them. I mean, I know many of you are probably immediately thinking, next generation of the chase explained it. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. I'm not going to talk about that now. This is a TOS talk, not TNG talk. So I'm going to give you a sneak peek of one explanation from the original series here. This is from the same episode Dr. Erin was talking about a little bit ago, Return to Tomorrow. I'm going to play a little clip. You're going to see also Dr. Pulaski's mom.
Welcome. I am Sargon.
Sargon, would it harm you if I...
You may use your tricorder, Mr. Spock. Your readings will show energy, but no substance. Sealed in this receptacle is the essence of my mind.
Pure energy. Matter without form.
Impossible.
But you once had a body of some type.
A body much as yours, my children, although our minds were infinitely greater.
That's twice you've referred to us as my children.
Because it is possible you are our descendants, Captain Kirk. 6,000 centuries ago, our vessels were colonizing this galaxy, just as your own starships have now begun to explore that vastness. As you now leave your own seed on distant planets, so we left our seed behind us. Perhaps your own legends of an Adam and an Eve were two of our travelers.
Our beliefs and our studies indicate that life on our planet Earth evolved independently.
That would tend, however, to explain certain elements of Vulcan prehistory.
In either case, I do not know. It was so long ago, and the records of our travels were lost in the cataclysm which we loosened upon ourselves.
There you go, kiss from Kirk. Okay. So, the hypothesis proposed here, this actually matches, many of you know, the reboot of Battlestar Galactica from the early 2000s, right? There's a great series. Yeah. Love it. It's possible you are our descendants, Captain Kirk, 6,000 centuries ago. I'm gonna emphasize that timing. Our vessels were colonizing the galaxy. Perhaps your own legends of Adam and Eve were two of our travelers. So we can break this down and say there's a couple of predictions from this, right? And I'm going to do this with all the different theories in tomorrow's talk, but this is just one of them. First, that Earth was visited by alien forms. I mean, I'm just going to put a check by that. I mean, maybe. I have no way to prove it or disprove it. The second is that evolution happened over 600,000 years to make varied humanoid forms, right? That, presumably this would explain not just the humans, but also maybe Cardassians, maybe Bajorans, et cetera, et cetera. And also that modern humans descend from these spacefarers. So the first part of this is actually pretty good, right? The idea is it could potentially work. If you go 600,000 years ago or 6,000 centuries ago, this would coincide with Homo erectus on Earth. Homo erectus did not look exactly like humans do today. This is one of our ancestors, right? You could imagine then that these space travelers then evolved over time on Earth to look like modern humans, but maybe evolved on Bajor to have little, ridges above their nose. Maybe on Denobula to have, the other four ridges and be able to inflate their faces and all these kinds of things. It's possible. I mean, we can't disprove it. But the important thing is the third part. The third part is who do we descend from? This assumes that we are not related to anything else on this planet. We're not related to chimps, we're not related to gorillas, or any other extant life on Earth. And you may remember Dr. Ann Mulhall there, who I was jokingly saying was Pulaski's mom. She specifically said, our studies have shown that Earth evolved independently. This is a big problem. Now, we know that from lots and lots of DNA evidence that we are related, and there's a fossil record on Earth for our evolution. So they actually called this out spot on. So interestingly, this is a case where original series Star Trek got the science actually cleaner than 2000s era Battlestar Galactica. They actually called out exactly the problem there. I mean, that was exactly correct. So overall, again, it's possible. I mean, I didn't put a check there, but maybe Earth was visited by alien life forms. This evolution aspect could work, but the idea that modern humans descend from spacefarers that recently, it doesn't work. It does not work in any sense. So just summarizing, I don't know if you want to summarize your part, but I'm going to talk a little about the biology of the 1960s, a little bit of the genetics that was known or not known at that time, a little bit of the biochemistry. Again, they nailed that part. And evolution, they did very well. And generally speaking, Star Trek does really well on the evolution side. I don't know if you want to highlight some of yours.
Yeah. I mean, I think for mine too, it's what's really cool is just thinking how modern a lot of the space terms that we use are, and not just that, but the medical technologies that is now we kind of take for granted, and we see in Star Trek all the time, but like why it wasn't mentioned. And that's my favorite part of yours is the graph that you have of how often they've managed to mention all of those things across the different series. So with that, I think we are good to answer some questions. Let's give it up.
Thank you all for being here.
Yay!
Question for Professor Noor. You talked about the silicone-based life forms. Do you have anything to say about the copper-based blood of Vulcans and how that chemically might work?
That's a great question. So just for reference for everybody, our blood is red, as you all know, and is also known to be iron-based. Vulcan blood is thought to be copper-based, and it's green. Now, we do know some life on Earth that has something kind of akin to, it's not exactly blood, but insects have green blood that is copper-based. It's not exactly blood, but it's kind of similar in concept. Could that work? I mean, it's shown from insects that in theory it could work. The challenge for me for that particular one is the idea that you would have a hybrid. It's like, what is that going to do? I don't know what that's going to do. I mean, you could look at Spock and say, I guess copper is just dominant, but that's an oversimplification. That's the piece that I struggle with. But in principle, could you have carbon as the basis for it? Yeah, insects have shown that we can.
What about horseshoe crab blood?
Horseshoe crab, I forget what color that's. That is a different color too. Is that like pink or something? Blue? I can't. I remember it's a different color, but I can't remember what color it is. Thank you. Okay. Somebody says blue. Thank you.
So this is just to follow up on your last point. If the show got a lot of these things right, not everything, did they have science advisors like you guys do now? Because it seems like they really do work at it now with very conscious staffing. How did they get what was right or what was wrong at TOS?
Yeah, certainly with, at least with the physics side of things, it's very just like a bros know bros type thing. And so Gene Roddenberry had friends working at, Hughes at the time, Raytheon, those sort of companies. And that whole sci-fi community was really integrated. All the writers at the time were really integrated with that aerospace industry. Again, it was like a huge boom for space exploration, and not to mention the Cold War and weaponry and all of those things. So you had all these physicists and engineers, and LA actually has a lot of big, Hughes Industries and everything was out in LA. And so the famous story from that was that Gene Roddenberry initially wanted to call it the time warp drive. And thankfully, that wasn't the case because Rocky Horror. That would be very confusing. But it was one of his friends kind of reading the script that was just I would just call it a warp drive. Don't worry about the time aspect. So I don't know about the biology side, but...
Same.
Same thing, yeah. So they weren't as formally recognized necessarily as technical advisors in the credit, but it was very much hey, can you read this and make sure I'm not embarrassing myself?
This wasn't part of your question, too, but to be very clear, there were science advisors all the way through Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, et cetera, as well, too. So and we know many of them very well. They've come to conventions, too.
Okay, so they were trying.
They tried, exactly.
Very much
and
so.
Yeah, I think that's great. Star Trek has a legacy of that, so yeah, very good. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Okay. I was going to ask. You were mentioning about black holes earlier, and I heard the supermassive black holes on the center of galaxies. Aren't they created? At least there's a theory that there's when there's a star and it's really big. And so that forms early on in the history of the galaxy, in a galaxy, and it eventually sort of collapses, and the black holes are created inside it, and then it I heard something about that, and that's how the supermassive black hole is believed to have been created, because these big stars they form, and part of them collapses and creates a black hole inside them, and then they're continuing to slowly shrink as the black hole basically consumes them.
Great question.
Their own gravity.
Thank you. Yes. So there are different classifications. It's a great question. There are different classifications for black holes. The ones I talked about in this talk were specifically what we call stellar mass black holes. Those are the ones that are left over when a star explodes. And those are the ones that we saw the most of for many, many years because we would see the stuff, I was like, that's my tattoo, glowing as it was falling into it. But that's a stellar mass black hole. And then in addition to that, we also observed, I actually don't know the year that it was sort of first established, but our galaxy has a supermassive black hole in the center of it. And so we had these two types of black holes, and there's a big mass gap in between them. And what's interesting is astronomers tried to come up with explanations, but the difficulty was the only way we could see that we could see stellar mass black holes was because they had to be fairly new, because stuff was still falling into them to be able to glow and give off light. Well, what happens when they eventually consume all of that stuff and then they're just empty? We have no way of detecting them. And then we could see stuff orbiting a black center in the center of our galaxy, and based on how quickly things were orbiting, we can do the physics and see how massive that is. So the big question was, how do you get from that to that? And what's great is that in 2015, the LIGO collaboration detected stellar mass black holes merging. But because they were using the ripples of space-time, they didn't need to see the material glowing. They could actually just see the ripples and tell how massive they are. So LIGO now has seen dozens of black hole collisions and actually started to fill in that mass gap. So how you get from a stellar mass black hole to a supermassive black hole is that they merge and evolve and get bigger from merging together and migrate to the center of a galaxy over time. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, thank you. That was a great question, though. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I've heard of that, too.
Great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Luce. I'm a radiologist. I was so happy to see you put those, origins of the CT scanner, the MRI scanner. I did want to kind of let everybody know about some updates, like some new technology that's been going on and getting closer to maybe having something that is like a tricorder, at least on the imaging side of things.
Real quick, there's a few more people, but yeah, if you have a quick one.
So we do have portable, wireless ultrasound probes, which send signals to your iPhone and iPad, and that essentially can become something similar, can give us really quick imaging. And there are portable-ish MRI scanners, which are currently just being used in ICUs and mostly in neuro ICUs. So we're getting there. And thanks for putting that in your talk.
Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Some of you may be familiar too. I think it was about 10 years ago, there was an X Prize competition to try to make something akin to a medical tricorder. And I think they had like 12 things they had to do, and I think they came up with half of them. So if you Google it, you can find out more about it.
Yeah, really cool.
I just wanted to say thanks for this talk. It's really fun. And I'm one of the physicists who became a physicist because I was a Star Trek fan. So there's got to be a lot of them out there. Anyway, so I'm from the original series age, so I'm so old. But I remember the discussion many times of the eugenics wars that were talked about again and again. And I was always looking for the next series to start talking about the history to fill in that gap. And we never went back there. World War II politics, I think, kind of went a different direction. But I was wondering what your thoughts are on what you guys, because you guys talk about a lot of the arcs. Does it ever come up as did we just drop the eugenics wars history?
It does seem like it got, I think it was referenced in Strange New Worlds, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a reference to it there, but the specifics of it obviously got changed in Strange New Worlds when they moved the timing of Khan and things like that. So, yeah, no, it hasn't been built out in terms of the specifics of what exactly happened or who did what. No,
from a writer brain, I don't want to write that story.
Right. I don't either, to be clear.
That gives me all sort of squishy anxiety.
No, exactly. I don't even particularly want to advise on it. I mean, if they ask, I'll do it, but I don't really want to.
Terrifying.
But I appreciate the question.
No, it's a great thought.
And what you said too, can we get a show of hands how many people in here became their careers because of Star Trek or what you studied? That's amazing. That's so cool. Awesome. I love it. All right.
Great talk. Thank you very much. it's really inspiring to hear about all the things that Star Trek came up with, and now we're trying to invent it. But I'd like to kind of turn that 180. What have you seen in First Generation or the rest of them that not in 10 million years are we ever going to do that one?
I got one for you. This is my favorite one. So yeah, again, I've talked a lot about how things like wormholes, warp drives, even like replicators, the science behind them is fine. There's just a lot of other things that we would have to do to get there. The one that breaks physics is the transporter. That is the one thing, and it makes me so sad. But the reason is because in order for a transporter to work, you have to break down all of the tiniest particles and then either move them or map where they are and rebuild them somewhere else. You want to know exactly where they go. And unfortunately, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle says you can never know exactly where a particle is. You start to lose the rest of the information about it. But what I love is that in the next generation, O'Brien at one time is working on the Heisenberg compensator.
When in doubt, put a name on it.
And I love that so much because it really leans into the science fiction of it all, but it's very much just saying like, look, we know we broke physics. Like we know, but like we fixed it at some point. And of course the old joke is, how does the Heisenberg compensator work? It works very well, thank you.
Before we go to the next question, there was a debate in the Star Trek The Crew's Facebook group about transporters in particular. And I'll say what I put in my answer, and I think you agree, but I'll check on it. The specific question was, are you dead when you go into the transporter? My answer is very much yes, because my understanding for the transporter is that even if you fix this whole Heisenberg thing again, it's just mapping where you are and using matter from there. So none of the matter that was you is now the other you.
Right.
So to me, that means you're dead. There's just a duplicate of you came out over there.
And what's funny is that Star Trek actually has kind of contradicted itself with this canon over time. And really the one that did it was, the counterexample to that was the Enterprise episode where Hoshi is like, I'm not getting in that thing. And she talks about it actually moving your same particles. But then most of the examples we see, like that's how you end up with two Rikers, right? Is that you just have a data stream and you're just making someone out of the other one. So yeah, that's life philosophy and for a talk at the bar at 2 a.m.
Love it.
Those sort of things. But yes, please.
Hello, name's Bradley. Some people maybe know me as Kermit for some reason. But so just wanted to give a shout out. You had mentioned women not getting enough credit on the physics side for the invention of the pulsar. And it reminded me, I thought there was someone with genetics that had kind of a similar position, and I had to look it up and remind myself that about Rosalind Franklin.
Correct.
X-ray crystallographer who was crucial for discovering the structure of the double helix.
The double helix, exactly. That's absolutely right.
Whereas Watson and Crick seem to get all the credit for it. So
yeah, there is, I agree completely, and I think that is true. There is some debate about exactly how much she contributed, but the fact she was not on the Nobel Prize was criminal. I think the argument was that she had passed away, but that seems silly. It seems like they should have still done it nonetheless. Yeah, but you're exactly right.
Thanks for the recognition. We appreciate it. Yeah. Hi.
Hello. I've got a question about the graph with the terms on it in the different series. If we were to extend, we don't have to show the graph. It's not about what's on.
We like our graphs. It's fine.
If we were to extend that graph into our current era of new Trek and then further on into wherever Trek is going next, what sort of terms would you expect to see on there?
Well, this is an interesting one because we get to put the terms in there.
Yeah, we are biased. They let us choose the words. We've seen gravitational waves, and that's in no small part, but honestly, a lot of that isn't from even me suggesting that we should do that. A lot of that is because the writers are sci-fi writers, right? Even if they're not scientists as a background, although some of them are, they are reading and interested in science news anyway. And so they're paying attention to those headlines and those discoveries. Like I gave a talk earlier in the week of just the year in space science of like headlines you may have seen just pass by. So a lot of the writers will be like, oh, I saw this thing, gravitational waves. I don't know much about it, but it sounds cool. And it sounds like we can use that for our story. And then I'm like, no, not like that. But that's okay. And so, yeah, certainly, we're a little bit biased, but being able to work in, and this is what I think I love so much, is that you can almost date Star Trek based on what is popular at that time and what people are. I talked about the black holes and how all of that was sort of coming around at the same time Star Trek was. But another great example I like to use is in the technical manual of The Next Generation, they talk about things like how the artificial gravity generator works, and it's primarily powered by superconductors. And some of you may remember in the room in the late 80s, early 90s, that was like a big technology that people were really invested in. So you can kind of date it based on what technology people are mentioning or what's in the news that day. So it really does kind of follow our modern science lexicon, and sometimes by us, but a lot of times just from the writers being interested in science.
The writers are really excited about it, and per Dr. Erin's comment, I mean, sometimes they're so excited they get something that wasn't exactly right. So one great example, this is right before we came on board. You may remember in first season Discovery, they talked about the tardigrade and how it acquired much of its genome by horizontal gene transfer. There had been a paper just 2 years before that, published by some researchers at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, our rival school. You'll see why I'm emphasizing the rival school part in just a second. But there was a paper about that talking about how tardigrades, the genome of a tardigrade had been sequenced, and they said, oh look, 16% of his genome was by horizontal gene transfer. The next year there was a paper saying that's not right. It didn't get the press releases though, so it got pulled in. But nonetheless, I actually still call that a win because, I mean, again, the writers were really trying to bring cutting edge from the moment science into the show as they were doing it.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. So thank you. All right, these last two are going to have to be our last two, and then we'll call it. But thank you.
So I had a question about phasers. Is there an explanation of how you can atomize a person and not have an explosion big enough to destroy the entire planet?
That's such a great question. I really actually am upset with myself that I haven't done the math on how big the blast would be if you tore apart a human being into its subatomic components. Budget. But it's a great question, right? Because, yeah, you hit someone with a phaser, we see them just turn into atoms. But to what extent and how far? And what are you just splitting the molecules apart, And so that's my more scientific answer than so we're not splitting atoms, we're just splitting molecules. Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Erin. I can't top that, so I just want to say thank you. I just want to say on behalf, I think, of the audience, you guys are phenomenal science communicators. I learned so much today. So I just super thank you. You guys are awesome, and that's it.
All right. Well, perfect ending, so thank you very much.
Thank you all for joining us. It was a pleasure talking with you. We're looking forward to seeing you for the rest of the cruise, too. Stop us anytime to say hi.
All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.